those guys who don't know Helen, a hugely helpful financial strategist during lockdown for me personally, but I know in the wider community, fantastically beneficial advice you were giving out, free content, which is really kind. So thanks again for joining us. Obviously, we're talking about the future of work, the podcast, the 2 white papers we're producing. In terms of, I guess, advice you're giving now then, so what's your view to people who perhaps thought they were coming out of it in terms of your client advice? What are you saying to people?
I think, with everyone, people kind of talk about forecasting and they say, well, it's just impossible to do. And kind of the advice we're giving them is you've just got to try. You have to just put a line in the sand and say, well, do you know what? This is what we think might happen. And this is where we were back in, really going back to kind of June time, where no one knew what it was going to be like when we came out of the lockdown there. So all they can do is make a best guess and see where that leaves. So they've got that kind of opportunity. If it does mean they need extra funding or they do need to sadly make staff cuts, they're kind of doing that now. And so that's really the approach a lot of our clients are taking. I think there's a few businesses where they've just accepted that there's not going to be anything until the spring, and kind of, I don't really want to say too much about those because people know who those clients are, but some businesses will have to really go into hibernation effectively, and those business owners are just trying to get income from other sources in that meantime before their viable businesses can then come back into play in the spring next year.
Yeah, I know. I must admit, we felt like we'd kind of hibernated. Obviously, our core business being effectively the hiring and recruitment side of it. I think that itself was 90% of it was hibernating really from about April to September. But we've seen a massive, in B2B and services, we've seen a massive uplift. So that's really, really good for the sort of wider economy. But it gives me optimism that I think people have adapted. Do you think that the world now is probably less worried about a lockdown in terms of that, just the emotional thing? There's not been the stories of runs on the supermarkets, perhaps. People know about living at home, and like we're talking about kids, I think, as well. Kids being at school and not at home, that kind of removes that problem and keeps them happy. So I feel as though actually this time around I'm nowhere near as concerned as I perhaps was in March, April.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's that hope, obviously, that we will have this defined period, but I think deep down we all know that it potentially could be extended. But I think you're right. I think having been through it all before, everyone knows what to expect, and there's not that same panic. So at the start of the last one, we had a number of clients who work on retainers who, I remember one client lost 2/3 of his business in 5 days. That's not happened this time. I think people have kind of said, hopefully this is just a blip and we're going to have to deal with it. And I think, in fact, people are kind of recognising that this might happen again in maybe January, February. We might have another peak, because if we're all out at Christmas, whether people follow the rules or not, there's potential that might happen again. So we've just got to work through this until the vaccine's in place. So I think you're definitely right. I think there is that less, from a business confidence point of view, there's less of a panic element, even though there is obviously concern.
Yeah, I was just going to say on the levels of concern, is it maybe less so at the business owner level, because they've managed to structure themselves and organise themselves, especially with the advice from people like yourself, Helen, who are putting that out there, making sure that they get the ducks in a row. I think, is it now been transferred almost to the everyday worker, who they were maybe on furlough. There was an estimated 500,000 people going to be suddenly unemployed at the end of furlough. Might be up to 2 million people unemployed, say December the 2nd. Now, if you're going to be on that knife edge waiting for that until Christmas, and the end of the year, I think there's a lot of anxiety out there. And as a business owner, you feel that. So whilst they might be a bit more assured that the business isn't going to totally go under and they are going to be able to rescue some jobs, there is a climate of a lot of people out there who are completely anxious and nervous. And have you seen that as well from the business owner?
Yeah, I mean, I think, they have tried to do their best to, I've certainly seen lots of business owners keep people on as long as they can. But being frank, there have been business owners who have seen during this period that they perhaps had some kind of extra capacity. So there have been redundancies made because business owners have realised they can operate in a more lean fashion. And I totally agree with you. I think there is that concern being transferred more to the employees because they don't have all the information in front of them. As business owners, we can see it all, can't we? We can see whether what's coming is bad or good, or kind of we can cope. Whereas, we've all been there in that position as the employee. you've no idea, have you? And so you kind of just sat there worrying. And I've seen it, personally in my own family. My father-in-law was made redundant, my brother-in-law was made redundant, and my sister-in-law has just survived a consultation. So it's very personal. I think for one of those, they were kind of given a choice, either far reduced hours, but they'd actually got a temporary job somewhere else, and it's very difficult for people to kind of make that decision. But it's a really valid point. I think definitely there's more concern from an employee level than there is perhaps from the employers.
I couldn't agree more with that. I think it's so true. I think often people have made that decision to work in a corporate and work for somebody else because they want that security. They don't want the headaches of running a business and that sort of thing. And I think, ironically, in times of crisis, I think that extra vision you get as a business owner of what's going on can actually reduce stress rather than actually being the unknown. So we tried to be really open with our comms and make sure that everybody knows, even when people haven't asked a question, we've tried to preempt conversations. And certainly the clients we work with, the ones who've done it brilliantly, the communication is so upfront, well in advance, and it's brilliant. But as you say, we've also seen examples where you can see people are totally and utterly either profiteering, or at least they've just reshaped the business. They've seen that actually, we operate better like this. We're going to keep it that way.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there's people who are capitalising. So we're seeing quite a lot of capitalising where one business that's been sort of neck and neck with a competitor has seen some people get made redundant or whatever, and they've just decided to just go for it and absolutely, start hiring in advance of their competition. So, I mean, there's a bit of risk to that, but you've got to sort of fortune favours the brave, doesn't it? Really, I think it's, as Mitch said, I think it's the day-to-day. I saw a thing on the BBC News this morning about the tradesmen out there. How do they work now that people are in lockdown? Because some people won't want them around the house and all that sort of stuff. I mean, I'm of the view that if I was getting my house done up, the last thing you want is a job stopping for 3 months or whatever. So I guess because you were giving out some of the best advice, Helen, genuinely in financial terms and strategic work, sort of 3, 4, 5 months ago, as you always have done. What's the best advice you've either been given or you've seen in terms of the current businesses that they just thought they're about to bring everybody back off furlough, or they've just brought people back off furlough, they're almost back at full capacity, probably slightly concerned about that. What's your advice over the fact that it might only be a month of furlough? Do they need it? Should they capitalise on that if they can, or is it a case of you brought people back, so don't use it? What's your view?
I think with the furlough, I think you've just got to be honest. I have heard lots of stories and seen it in the media about people really, abusing that system. Sadly, I think it's there to protect the employee, and really for a business, and I've seen lots of businesses use it very, very well in terms of, if now because of this lockdown your work is impacted, then actually using that furlough scheme will help preserve your business for longer. It gives that employee that wage that they need, and it just kind of releases that pressure temporarily for 4 weeks whilst demand is reduced. So I think if you are finding that you are impacted, then of course you must use it. And I think, just being honest, I think it's very obvious for those businesses who are closing completely, like the hospitality industry. But for those of us that are not, who might be in a supply chain of those sectors, it's just really about being honest and kind of thinking carefully about what you actually need during this time. Because if you've got a team of maybe 10 and you can furlough half of them, then that might buy you an extra, month or two when you're actually trying to climb out of it. So, I think it's really promising, and I was pleased to see it. Obviously, we had all those debates about the financial support for Tier 3, particularly in Manchester, and feeling like 2/3 wasn't sufficient. So it's great to see that 80% back, particularly with businesses down to kind of 60%, where it's been in October. I think that people should think carefully about using it, use it appropriately, of course, but I think it's there to help you survive longer until we get back to normality.
Yeah, I agree, and I think particularly as we don't have a sort of finite timescale on it, it's therefore doesn't have a finite cost or impact, does it?
No.
Changing it slightly away from just purely financial, but it is impacting from a commute perspective. I think there were a lot of businesses that thought Manchester, as a fellow northerner, Manchester coming back to normal, and people starting to go in the pubs and all that over the summer. That obviously is going to have an impact on hospitality, as you said earlier. But have you seen many clients or businesses out there where they were kind of reliant by now of the physical need to be commuting again and back in the office, and this is really scuppering them, or do you think people have adapted completely with tech?
Yeah, I think the latter. So I have a number of businesses now who are assessing how much office space they actually need,
Right.
and looking to reduce that. So I've only got a couple of clients who've moved fully to, right, I don't need an office anymore, I'm going remote. There definitely seems to be more of that hybrid, and I'm definitely more of an advocate of that. I totally agree, I can totally understand that kind of, I don't need the commute and I can save all these costs, but for me, the benefits of that office environment, whether it be kind of knowledge sharing, team building, and even, the commute. I mean, my commute is currently 5 minutes, but when it was the 45 minutes into Manchester when I used to work for someone else, the one thing I really noticed, and I noticed it more after I'd finished maternity leave, is that kind of break it gives you. And whilst, yeah, it is frustrating sat in traffic and it taking me 45 minutes to travel 10 miles, it does give you that break between home and work. And I think we have to acknowledge that some people really need that. And also that some people just don't have somewhere in the house to sit and work. They've got to sit at the dining table, they don't have an office. So it's so much more for an employer to consider rather than, oh, that's going to save me rent and rates. And I think that's really important. And that's why I think a lot of our clients have gone for this kind of hybrid model where people are maybe working in the office 2 days a week and home 3 days.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Completely agree.
Totally agree on that. And we've said this as part of the white paper. Actually, we mentioned it in the conclusion about there's going to be a hybrid future of work, because there are benefits to working from home. The carbon footprint getting reduced. There's a productivity level of people, flexibility around childcare and all different circumstances people have. But people want human interaction. They don't have to have it every day, but they want it, at least once a week, or they at least have that place they can go where they can connect with people, or they have a team meeting or things like that where they can brainstorm things. Because whilst the technology is there for a lot of this, you'll never fully replace the human experience. And I think there's other things about it, like you were saying there, Helen. Like everyone's got different circumstances here. Everyone's got their own unique, version of this event that's going on. Like some people are working on kitchen tables, some people are in offices at home, some people are sharing it. Someone's got the kids for an hour while someone has the office for an hour. It's all different for everyone, and I think there's other things happening, like there's anxiety issues being created as a result of this. There's that they said, that commute, that total lack of switch off, and I've seen people doing a fake commute. So they'll go out first thing in the morning, they'll get up, they'll get showered as if they're getting ready for work, they'll go out for 10 minutes round the block and then come back, and then they're right, I'm ready to go now, I'm at work. And the same thing in the evening. It's the fake commute, because it was that switch off period, especially if you're in the same room every day, like all day, every day, which I've been guilty of, because I'm basically working in my living room and I've like finished work late at night and then I'm just buzzing and like I'm in the same room. So it's like that thing of not being able to switch off. And I've seen the fake commute. I'm going to give it a go, actually.
That's hilarious. I mean, I have to say, I don't miss the commute at all, but what I miss massively is a lot of the business I did were in sort of incidental meetings that were really just a beer after work or breakfast with somebody before work, that you only really do face to face, and you learn things and find out things that are going on in the market or around the Northwest that I just wouldn't have found. If you've got half an hour on Teams with somebody, you just don't kind of get into that level of conversation. One question I want to approach with Helen, with the slight fear that this could be seen as political, but with all the experience you've had with your clients, and if you were given the access to the government to lobby them on any either rule changes that help business, that sort of thing, is there anything that you sort of think, if this was to go on for, let's say, another 6 months of disruption, which it could well do, what kind of areas would you change, either the tiering systems or what you've seen brought in terms of travel and restrictions, the rules, if you like, that sort of thing? Are there any areas that you think actually we could make a quick change now and that would actually hugely benefit the economy or a certain section of the economy?
Well, I was chatting, my brother emigrated to Dubai in August, and I was chatting to him at the weekend about how they're dealing with it. And very much over there, I mean, it's masks everywhere. And my brother and his wife are both teachers in secondary schools. So in the schools, the kids just wear the masks all the time for lessons, for in the corridor, everything. And that's primary and secondary, as much as the primaries will keep them on. And the other thing is their temperature is taken everywhere they go. And they also have a very short term, I know they talked about it in Liverpool this morning, but even shorter term, kind of this blood prick test that they get a result in a really short period of time. And he was saying that kind of at the courthouse, they've got a few friends who work there, they get tested every week, all the staff, every Monday they get tested, and you're sent home, obviously, if you test positive. And that's really brought that down over there. So then that confidence has then been brought back. And I think that's where we're at. Everyone's waiting for this vaccine now, but all these tier restrictions. I mean, in Manchester, I live in Tameside. When we went into tier 2, we were at 36 per 100,000, and now we're over 500. Now, I can see people on the outside might think that just no one's following the rules. And yes, there will be an element of that, but there has to be something else in there. So I think in order to bring business confidence, you can put as many grants or tax deferrals or loans or furlough schemes in place, but until we address that core issue, you're not going to get that confidence back from the business. So going a bit political, I think it has to be, that part of it, that kind of testing to stop the spread, but also that financial support to encourage people to isolate, because, understandably, some people at the moment can't financially afford to isolate. So I'm guessing some of those people then therefore might not get tested. So they won't get tested because they don't want to be told to isolate, or they do get tested and they still don't isolate. So I think until we address that core element of it, it doesn't really matter what financial kind of remedies you put in place, because we're never going to address that kind of core element of the issue. So I think that's probably the mistakes, that we've made in the past. I read something last week which said that this time all these tax deferrals and the loans just won't be enough, that there needs to be more grants in place, because the actual burden of debt is just going to be so great on businesses that all you're doing is just kicking the can down the road in terms of what that will mean. Before they put the second winter economy plan in, and obviously there's all these ones, when they had the initial tax deferrals of, well, your VAT's deferred until March and your personal tax deferred until January, everyone was kind of just expecting those peaks then. Initially it was, well, it'll be when the furlough scheme ends, it'll be in January, and then it'll be in March. And so some of those have kind of been delayed now. But I think any further help, it probably does have to be in the form of grants, because otherwise it's just, it's just literally delaying this decision.
Yeah, I agree with absolutely everything you said there. And I think the clarity of protection for people who are genuinely vulnerable, if you got that section of the community looked after and home deliveries and all that properly, gives a bit of confidence that anybody else who wants to kind of get on with life, that as long as you're wearing a mask, like you're saying, and remove the ambiguity that actually if you're out and about, of course you're wearing a mask, and be really strict about that, then I think it gradually, as you say, it spreads through the economy that actually there's a degree of confidence, and nobody's suggesting that somebody who's in a care home should go out to a restaurant or anything like that. And I think it's just make sure those crossovers aren't ambiguous. And also the kind of feeling of we're all in it together. I've really felt that in March, April, and it gradually we've all sort of been divided into those who hate the non-mask wearers to those who, the anti-vaxxers and all these kind of brigades, when really it should just be dead simple. The rules are not that complicated, really, are they? So, but as I say, I won't get too political. I just think they're the areas I'd have liked to have seen cleaned up, as you say, to negate the need for another 6 months of financial measures and those sorts of things. But conscious of time, and thanks very much, Helen. Absolutely amazing as ever. Your advice, brilliant. And obviously we'll be sharing the white paper. It's coming out during this week with a further edit. We thought part 2, to be honest, was going to be the sort of post-COVID, naively. So part 2 is a kind of interim update, and then part 3 will hopefully be a bit more positive at the end of it. But thanks again for all your content and contribution.
No problem.
Speak to you soon. Take care.
Okay. Cheers, Richard.
Fantastic. Cheers, Alan.